Hello, this is Cyntia Mazzaferri with Powerful Beyond Measure, and thank you for being here once again. I'm delighted to introduce to you Lori Leachman. Hi, Lori.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
Great, great. I'm so excited to have you here. Let me tell you a little bit about Lori. Lori is a professor of economics at Duke University. She has been teaching economics at the university level for over 35 years. She earned her PhD in economics in 1987 from the University of South Carolina. In 2012, when Lori's father passed away, she knew that she had a story that deserved to be told. She shared that story with a number of writing friends, trying to pique their interest, and they all told her that it was her story and that she needed to write it. And hence, the King of Halloween and Miss Firecracker Queen was born. So welcome, Lori. I'm so excited to talk to you about your wonderful book.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here.
Great. So let's start with the title. How did you create the title, The King of Halloween and Miss Firecracker Queen?
Well, my dad was the King of Halloween in 11th grade, and on the cover of the book, which is sitting right back here, I don't know if you can see it.
I can, thank you.
That is my father as the King of Halloween, and I have spliced my mother's face into the Queen. And I say very early in the book that my mother was what I like to call Miss Firecracker Queen at the University of Tennessee, and my dad was the King of Halloween, which I only discovered at his funeral, which was roughly on Halloween. And so that's how the title came together.
Great, great. And I love that you were able to use their pictures actually in the title and the book cover. That's awesome.
It's sweet.
Yeah, it is. So why did you feel the need and the desire to write this story, about your father, which is a beautiful testament to him, his life, and actually the sport that he loved, football?
Well, I really wrote the book for my mother because my father experienced a very long period of decline from CTE, which is
Can
chronic.
you define what CTE is for our listeners?
Yes, ma'am. It's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I think that's right, how you say it.
Right.
And basically, it is repeated head injury from concussion, from tackling in football. In the old days, they would call that your punch drunk. Okay. This was the same thing that boxers had from getting hit in the head. And now we know it's much more pervasive and is a result of playing a lot of different sports, not just boxing and football, but soccer, hockey, anything where there's real intense contact.
Right, exactly. And it is so debilitating, and it really has been misdiagnosed for so many years. And it hasn't been through until we actually did some biopsies on these high professional athletes that we started to realize that there are some definitely biological changes that are happening in the brain. And we'll get to that a little bit later, but very powerful story. So let me talk to you a little bit about your book, because it starts off with you and your parents really detailing what your life was like. You know, you moved from here to there and all how that kind of incorporated. So tell us a little bit about how your family life was and what were some of the attributes that your father really displayed in bringing you up, and how that made you feel.
Well, I grew up in an intensely competitive household. Because my dad was a professional football coach, everything was about competition and excellence, in particular physical excellence, but he also had great admiration for intellectual excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And what this meant for us, because we were a family of all girls, and that was a great mercy. I'm sure a boy would have become warped in that household due to expectation. But what it meant for us was that we had to be quite excellent in school. And if there were any sports that we played, we had to master them. And as a result of that, we took up dance.
Smart.
Nothing my dad wasn't interested in at all.
That kept him at bay, on the sidelines.
Yeah.
And he definitely couldn't coach it.
No. Okay. Okay. The other thing that was really remarkable about my childhood is that my dad was a big believer in the strength of mental capacity to make you bigger, better than you were. And so he was always about inspiration. And in particular, he used that with us, he used that with his players. When we were young, we used to write all these inspirational sayings on little pieces of note paper, and he would laminate them and put them all over his office or all over the weight room or any place where his players were. And so we grew up with this sort of sense of you're not limited by your capacity, and you have to perform. And those two things were both wonderful and also a little debilitating.
Exactly. And I love in your story, you give a few examples of how one that comes to my mind is when you were actually going off a high dive, and you landed on your back, a big crash, and how it's stinging, you're embarrassed, everyone laughing, this and that, and like the last thing you want to do is go back up there, and your father's pushing you back up there, and your mother's kind of saying, "Oh, I think she's had enough," and but it's this constant um, perception of you having to continue to achieve excellence when even we fall down, and we fall down in life. Let's be honest, not just as children, but as adults, right?
Exactly. But the good part of that is that I actually really believe that that upbringing enabled me to get a PhD.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have had the wherewithal to go through all the hoops and stick with it until the end if I didn't have that kind of upbringing. So, as I
Right.
say, if you like where you are, you cannot lament the path that got you there.
I love that saying, and it's a really powerful saying because it allows you to really resonate in your own power of your past, and that we can say the past can be limiting and limited in your opportunities of how you perceive life, what can come to you. Or you can also say your past allowed you to grow and expand and to pursue things that you really wanted to achieve. And it makes you who you are. Our past is definitely part of who we are. And so often many people want to run away from our past.
Well, I read your book, Cindy, and that's one of the things that you really focus on in your book. And I knew it was so true the moment I read it because I'd just written this memoir
Right.
and really, really dissected my own past. And so I think it's absolutely essential to being able to step forward with confidence and enthusiasm.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love that you could have really been an angry, daughter, angry at all the attention he sent to all his other team players, that he got all the love. He got all because he was they were the boys and I was a girl. And you could have been taking on a lot of different emotional energies that still could have been part of I never was met dad's standards of what was excellence. And so we can all have different perception. And part of that story I told you about the diving board, I believe in your book, it also said that when you shared that with your sister said, I think that was actually me on the diving board and you were looking on. But the point is, our perception of what happens in our life and our memories of our past often are very much distorted and becomes the fuel for how we engage in life in the present. And I just thought that was so interesting because I have four sisters and we often reflect back on different memories and we all have different perceptions of that.
Right, right. Well, with respect to the diving board, I put that in the book because I just thought that was a really important way to illustrate how intertwined my older sister and I were, because there was never a me before her, and for everything she remembers, there was never a her without me. And so, that I'm not sure if it is the truth or if it is my truth.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, but the other thing that I think is really important with respect to that story and other things in the book is the fact that I realized that all of my issues were really my issues. They weren't something my family did to me. They weren't something my sister did to me. They were my perception of me in the context of that household as the younger child. And that was really liberating with respect to any resentment or anger or any of that I might have had towards my older sister. I have a younger sister that's much younger, and she wasn't really in the picture, or with respect to my parents.
I love that. And that's a wonderful place to be. So congratulations to be able to have done that self-discovery and that self-analysis, and to be able to release some of the pains that we often bring with us from our past. So that's an awesome job. Well, let's go back to your father for a minute. What position did he play in his collegiate level and high school level? And how many times did he actually have a concussions that you're aware of or was severely injured?
My dad played high school from a very young age. Like, I don't know if even they had Pop Warner, but I know as a kid he was playing high school or playing ball, and then he played high school ball. He played football at the University of Tennessee, and then he played 1 year professional ball in the Canadian League. And he played at a time that if you were very good, you played both offense and defense. And my dad was very good. So he played offensive line as a center and as a defensive lineman, which are the worst positions to play with respect to CTE, because there's always all of that hitting
Contact, yeah.
on the line. What he recalled by the time he was beginning his incapacitation was that he had 8 concussions before the age of 22. And then he had a concussion around the age of 63, 64. He was hit at a game on the sidelines, and that really began his decline.
Mm.
And then he had one more after that. So he had 10 that we know of. But he also had Parkinson's, he had lower brainstem damage. All of these things are related to football and CTE.
It really is truly amazing. My husband's brother was actually out playing behind a church in a field. They were just playing a pickup football game, no helmets, no gear, nothing, just a football game of friends. And he actually went to go to catch the ball, and as he's running, catching the ball, his head smacked right into a telephone pole.
Oh my God.
And he was knocked out, but then, rose about a little bit, soon after, and then got up and continued playing. And I bring this up because nothing ever happened. He never really, there's no mental confusion. There was no dilation of the eyes. My husband's mother was a nurse, so checked all that out. But 40 years later, he actually started having problems with his eyes. And they come to find out that there was a blood clot in his frontal lobe, that they said this was due to some traumatic injury that you had in your past, and it's been unresolved. This blood clot that had been there, and this mass kept growing and growing, and eventually was putting pressure on his forehead area, and it was causing some memory issues, lots of different things. And can you believe that 40 years later, one injury?
Well, there's an article this morning in the New York Times about young people and football, and well, not just football, all kinds of contact sports. And what they have found with young people is all it takes is once. And what they're finding is that there seems to be some permeation in the blood-brain barrier, which is part of what gives you that sort of cushioning in your skull. And also that there seems to be some blood leakage across the brain. And so for young people, it is a much more severe issue than if you were to have head trauma as an adult, or potentially much more severe, I should say.
Right. Well, I don't know if most people know this, but our skull is the house of our brain, and there's cerebral spinal fluid that goes all around it, that cushions it. And when you do even a whiplash in a car, and you're hit from behind and you go forward, as you're going forward, the brain goes forward, and then what happens, it ricochets and goes back against the back of the skull and then back again to the front. So it gets slammed in 3 directions, if you will, forward, back, and then forward again. And that last one, the contra coup, we call that, it can be the most dangerous. And
Right.
so again, it's this constant contact and combat against your skull that's causing this damage, which is really quite significant. So let's get into that. So tell us a little bit, as your father started to have some symptoms, what those symptoms were, and how he was initially diagnosed with dementia because they can't really diagnose you with CTE, and explain that process, how that happened.
It began in small ways. He remembered everything football, but he couldn't ever remember where he put his keys. And yes, I know we all have that problem every once in a while, but his was constant and persistent. He couldn't navigate new places. Direction became very difficult for him, though he could do paths that he knew. He couldn't, he was not robust in anything outside of his routine. So even on a vacation somewhere, that would really rattle him. That
Hmm.
was the beginning. And then over time, he became very angry, which in large aggressive men is, not unusual. It's not unusual with dementia or Alzheimer's either. But it just manifests in a much more aggressive way in
Hmm.
these kind of guys. He started drinking, and we blamed him for his illness because we thought it was the alcohol.
Hmm.
We now know that addiction is highly correlated with CTE. And we learned because of some of his behavior that he was actually drinking because he didn't know what was happening to him, but he knew something was happening to him.
Right,
The drinking was his way to mask it.
right.
He could say, like one time he said to me, "Oh, let's watch this movie." And we had watched it the night before. And I said, "Daddy, we watched that the night before." He said, "Oh, I must have drunk too much last night."
Oh,
Okay. And that's the way he would cover it. He could forget for a while that he was forgetting, and he could blame it on drink. And then,
that
of
was
course,
his excuse that he justified when there was a lapse of understanding and memory. Yeah.
exactly. Over time, it got to where he couldn't drive. He couldn't even, figure out things how to turn on the stove. Um, he for the longest time he was capable of dressing himself and getting himself sort of organized, but that began to dissipate as well. And then his hygiene just, he became totally not interested in a shower. He did brush his teeth, but it was always a struggle.
Yeah.
And then eventually, he really just became incapacitated. And at that point, he was put in an assisted living center.
And so he was diagnosed living with Alzheimer, which is very typical because doctors don't know what else to do. There was a change in mental capacity and functionality in life. And so typically that's what they refer to it as nowadays. It's not usually dementia, which is a different type of loss of memory. Alzheimer is more the current diagnosis.
Well, in the
And
summers, it's progressively worse, right?
yeah,
And his was clearly moving progressively worse.
right,
So that
right.
explains. And the doctor, he was treated here at Duke at the Neurological Disorders Clinic.
Mm.
And the doctor told us, he said, everything he has is lifestyle induced. We just didn't understand that meant football. We thought it meant alcohol.
Right. And your father was quite famous as a coach. He eventually went into different coaching at lots of different universities, and actually went to the Super Bowl, correct?
Yeah, he won Super Bowl 21 with the New York Giants and Bill Parcells.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really tremendous. Did you get to go and watch him coach?
Well, I went to the game, but at the time I was early married to my first husband, had a young child, and he had started his own business. We were struggling financially, so we actually made the choice to sell our tickets because you can make a lot
Um,
on the tickets. So we actually went to the whole Super Bowl hoopla, but we didn't go to the game. We watched it at the hotel and then went to the after
I got you. Okay. Interesting. Well,
party.
I
But
love this interview because in just a few days, we're actually going to be having the Super Bowl. And it's the Philadelphia and the New England Patriots. this year. So we're really looking forward to that game. It's always amazing. So why don't you share with us? Well, first of all, let me ask you this. There was a great movie that came out called Concussion.
Yep.
And the whole sports arena, especially the NFL, was all up in arms because they really felt that it was putting a very negative slant on football with concussions and the CTE that you're talking about.
Mhm.
What is your feelings and what have you heard in the football arena regarding that movie, and also what changes have been brought into the sport because of it?
Well, not enough change, I would say that. Also saw that movie. I thought the opening of it was heartbreaking.
Mm.
Bennett Olney has a new book out, and it's something titled "The Truth Is Not Compromisable" or "Nothing But the Truth," something like that. I would encourage everybody to check it out if you're interested in that topic. And the reality is that that didn't really change much of the way football approaches the game. I think what is happening now with the precipitous drop off in young people playing football is a warning shot over the bow. And the NFL, I think, will necessarily have to respond to that in some way. But I don't think that they have any comprehensive approach to that yet. I mean, I'm in this women's group of the NFL, and one of the things that's true is that over 1,000 people have applied for the money, the funding pool for CTE and head-related trauma, and 100 people have been qualified.
Oh, really?
Okay, so they are making it. It's a very slow, very difficult process. Okay, and I think that ultimately the game will need to reform itself if they want to have a future that is not something that looks like a gladiator sport.
Mm.
Okay. And I think part of this, it will be that young children will not be able to play contact football. In fact, Indiana has a piece of legislation now that they're contemplating that making it illegal for anyone under 16 to play football.
Right.
Ultimately, they have changed practices, so there's less contact in practice. A couple of teams have introduced robots so that you only have one contact, not two people hitting each other. There's a new helmet out that is a soft helmet, but it's $1,500.
Mm.
And so, in my own view, if the NFL really were taking the long view, they would be providing those helmets to every high school team across the country and every collegiate team. Okay, because that is their pipeline. They would
Right,
also
that's a good point.
be investing in equipment, better neck guards. The mouth guard now we know really matters for concussion as well, and they'd be funding research. And I don't really see that happening at this point, but I'm hoping that maybe some of that will come out of this dialogue and others, not necessarily related to my book, but maybe surrounding that.
I love that. That's really important. So if you're a parent, a grandparent, mother, father, to really think about, how we're so concerned about what we expose our children to with what they eat, their nutritional value, how much television, how much cell phone they use now. I mean, pediatricians saying do not allow them to use a cell phone or any electronic device, television, anything for 2 years. 2 years because they know it's damaging the brain. It actually creates and causes them to have smaller brains. Amazing, right? So, I mean, we need to realize that a brain is growing. It's a very soft, supple, very highly sensitive organ, and we need to take care of it. So I think that your book is just another awareness that's out there with everything else that continues to hopefully spread this continued need to do more research. And like you said, I love that you said that support of the pipeline. If they're going to continue with the sport, then we need to make sure all these safeguards are put in lower down in the stream, which is
I
great.
just say one thing here.
Yeah.
I want to say to all of your viewers that I just think parenting in this day and age, it's got to be the hardest job
Mhm.
out there. Okay. We all know that our job is to get our kids to adulthood. in this day and age, parents are confronted with so many difficult choices. It's technology, it's sport, and I'm just thankful my children are grown and
I'm with you.
don't have that job anymore. So kudos to everyone out there in the trenches that's working through that.
I agree. Can you bring your book cover up closer to the screen so we can all see it?
Proudly, I can.
You can. And I want to just say that, whether you are a parent of a young child, whether you're really interested in football, this is a great book because it also talks about, like how Lori was talking about, how it taught her to excel, the importance of excelling, but also to realize you don't have to be perfect. And it was something she always kept working for, this perfection that really never exists, right? So there's
Right.
things that you can take away from her book that's really not just relating to the CTE or her personal father's story. So I encourage you all to, get this book. Maybe the whole family could read it. It's something that I think everyone can take a win out of it.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. And Lori, so why don't you tell people where they can get the book and what your website is? So if they want to reach out to you, that'd be great.
Great, thank you. So the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Chapters, Powell's, in e-form next week.
Yay!
Yay, right after the Super Bowl. And then the print version, which is the official launch of the book, comes out May 22nd, 2018. My website is www.lorileachman, LORILEACHMAN.net. And you can read some of the endorsements for my book, the introduction, read about me if you're interested on my website.
That's great. Well, this has been wonderful, Lori. Is there anything you want to depart with words of wisdom to those that are listening to this?
Well, one of the things that I say, and I think it's really important to note, that in my book is not a hatchet job on football. Football gave us a life, and it was a wonderful life, and we loved it. And I hope that comes through in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I also hope that, people recognize that they have a lot more information, and that makes choices a lot harder now. As I say, my father played football. He loved football. He wouldn't have done it differently, but he didn't have full information. And it was all upside for him. And that is no longer the case.
Right. Well, this has been great. And we do appreciate the steps that NFL have taken. They have the concussion protocols now, and you can't have direct hitting with the helmet, and safeguards for the quarterback and the kicker and this and that. So we applaud their efforts and encourage them to continue to make safeguards for their athletes and really every sport. I know NASCAR has done a lot of changes in their helmets and their cars and things. So I encourage all sports and to parents and to coaches to make sure that they're responsible and take some action as the best they can to provide that safety net for our children and, of course, the professional athlete as well.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lori. It's been wonderful meeting you and getting to talk about your book. I really enjoyed reading it. And again, I think it's perfect timing. Your book's coming out with the greatest football game of the year. And so whoever you're rooting for, good luck. I hope you come out a victor. And if you're not, you still succeeded because you made it to the final playoffs. So awesome job. Thank you, Lori, and best luck to you in your sale of your book and your, public speaking on it and the exposure to CTE. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Cindy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And to my listeners, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Once again, this is Cyntia Mazzaferri with Powerful Beyond Measure. We'll see you next week with another fabulous author. Take care.